Many of us are scared to speak out. I think many of us are scared because of the comeback you can get, the sort of Twitter outrage that can come about if you say something even mildly frank about the current trans obsession. And you tend to get dumped on with a huge outcry. And so many people, I think, are zipping their mouths shut and refuse to speak out.
Do you think that we are, in many ways, self-censoring, however, a little bit too easily? We are too timid because, in a sense, Twitter doesn't exist.
Exactly. I mean, it's just graffiti on the wall. So yes, I think we are self-censoring too much. I think it requires just a modicum of courage to avoid self-censoring.
Coming on to the issue itself, as a biologist, would you agree with people like Kathleen Stock who say that actually a transgender woman is not a woman?
Yes, I would. I mean, it's a semantic issue. If you define a woman as somebody who calls themselves a woman, then that's another matter. But as a biologist, then it's absolutely clear. It's one of the very few genuinely binary things we have in biology. And I've actually written an article called The Tyranny of the Discontinuous Mind, which suggests that just about everything you look at is a continuum. But sex is the one thing that isn't. It's the one thing that really is binary. I mean, everybody is, with tiny, tiny minority of exceptions, is absolutely either male or female.
And yet we live in a world also where, because of medical advances, biological advances, it's much easier to change gender using surgery, much better than it used to be, and of course pills, medicine as well. And in that world, do you see why some people are so terribly upset by the kind of language we've been using just now? In other words, they really feel their own identities, which they have changed themselves, are under threat.
Yes, I do. I mean, I read Jan Morris's memoir, Conundrum, when it came out, and I was very moved by that. And it's clear to me that there is such a thing as gender dysphoria, and there are people who really are, psychologically speaking, feel they're born into the wrong body. But now it's just become a trend. It's become like a school craze where there's just sort of social contagion. And so the vast majority of people who are being pressured into almost, I mean, I was literally mean pressured by medical professionals. If you breathe the slightest word that you might be in the wrong body, oh, right, put you on hormones. So I think that's what's going on. But once again, I come back to the semantic point. It's a matter of politeness. If somebody wishes to be called a woman,
respect,
then I don't mind, out of respect, I don't mind doing so. But what I do draw the line at is actually saying, as a biologist, yes, you are a woman. No, you're not a woman. I mean, we have a very clear way of defining what a female or a male is throughout the animal kingdom, based on gamete size and various other things. But gamete size is the most fundamental one.
Now, you can understand why some people get personally very upset about this. But the culture itself, not just the individuals, seems to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in terms of outrage on this and other subjects as well. Why do you think that we have so little capacity at the moment for, as it were, restraint, for listening, for being moderate in our use of language?
I suppose it's social media, and I suppose I've always felt that it's anonymity, the fact that you don't have to give your name, you call yourself Tinky Winky or something like that, and nobody knows who you are.
And you can say what the hell you like.
You say what you like, just like writing a graffito on a wall, and nobody knows who you are. So it really is that. It's the electronic equivalent of something on a lavatory wall.
Looking at universities more generally, when you were growing up and attending them and making your way as a biologist, and when I was going there, they were always seen as citadels of absolute free speech, where anything could be said, any proposition could be put out there, tested, refuted, and if it was no good, defeated. That seems to be changing. Again, my question is why?
This is the most shocking thing to me, that at universities of all places, universities are places where, above all, you should be free to speak out and argue and contest and say, I disagree with you there, let's thrash it out. And that is what's gone. That's what's so tragic at universities of all places. It's as though people, certainly quite a lot of people at universities, don't really understand what a university is for, what they're doing there. Why do they go to university if they don't want to discuss and argue and debate.
You sound very much like a free speech absolutist. Are there things that you think should not be said?
Well, I suppose the proverbial fire in a crowded theatre, although Christopher Hitchens even disputed that. I think there are clearly cases like that. Incitement to violence.
Holocaust denial?
Yes, I think... I'm not...
You pause on that one, it's interesting.
I pause a little bit because that is something you can argue about. You can. I mean, it's the evidence is so absolutely overwhelming that but I don't think it's a case for censorship.
And the same would be true, presumably, over the very, very intense argument going on at the moment about whether the lockdowns were necessary during COVID, what should have been done. There's a lot of accusation and counter-accusation whirling around.
Yes, and I think that's a case where it's a place for genuine debate, and I'm not fully up to speed with that, but it is an important area of disagreement, and I've spoken to epidemiologists in the last couple of weeks, actually, who disagreed, not simultaneously, but disagreed with what each other has said. And so I'm left a little bit up in the air, not knowing what to think.
But having a civilised debate.
That is something you can have a civilised debate about.
And when it comes to this notion that not free speech should be absolute, but near absolute. Let me just try and put a counter-argument, which is that opinions don't exist by themselves. They are surrounded by a kind of lattice of facts or possible facts, and that we now live in the world, we've mentioned the internet already, but because of social media, where there is such a lot of deliberate misinformation, deliberate false fact out there, that perhaps we need a harder view of what can and should be said, because a lot of what's being said at the moment is simply, whatever the issue, untrue. We're trying to debate at the moment whether or not the Ukrainian offensive has started out there. And the versions of what is actually happening in Ukraine could not be more different.
So because there is false information, because people are actually known to be lying, you feel that means that we should, be more censorious about when somebody's saying something that you actually know to be false? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am. So if you give an opinion about something that is a malicious falsehood, then that opinion itself is tainted. And maybe that's where the limits of free speech these days come. I mean, you mentioned earlier on the Holocaust, and there's the huge weight of historical evidence about what happened is pretty much irrefutable. But would you platform a Holocaust denier, even so?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think I would oppose those. I think the Austrian government is one that actually puts people in jail for Holocaust denial. You can kind of see why they won't do it in Austria. But I wouldn't go that far. I would not invite a Holocaust denier. I don't think I would attempt to stop them from speaking if they had been invited. I think I imagine that people would go along and argue with them.
This is what you might say a reasonably hardcore Voltairean. Voltaire, I defend to the right, I dislike what you say, but defend the death your right to say it, point of view. And in some respects, people might say it's a kind of Enlightenment point of view. Do you think that world is now shriveling and disappearing, the world of the Enlightenment?
Isn't it? I've actually, I meet perhaps not deliberate false facts, but inadvertent false facts in my own field of evolutionary biology, where people are just talking nonsense, and nonsense. Anybody who looks at the facts would know that what a creationist says is nonsense. I'm not talking about the religious aspect, but things about evolution that are clearly false. And I've sometimes regretted that the law of libel demands that somebody should be damaged. I sort of feel maybe nature should be allowed to
fight back as well.
Nature can't, because nature is not an entity that has rights.